6 minutes. That's how long the human brain can survive without oxygen before permanent damage sets in. Tammy Warner was on minute 4, her fingernails torn and bleeding from clawing at the satin-lined lid of a pine casket, dirt seeping through the cracks with every impossible breath she tried to take. 6 minutes since her husband David had slipped the sedative into her anniversary champagne, watched her eyes roll back, and carried her limp body to the trunk of his Mercedes like she was nothing more than luggage he no longer needed. 6 minutes since David and his mistress Sienna, the personal trainer Tammy had hired to help her get her body back, had driven her unconscious form to a pre-dug grave in the Palisades forest. A grave they'd measured during their morning jogs. A grave they'd timed and planned with the same attention to detail most couples save for vacation itineraries. 6 minutes of terror, trapped in silk and darkness, listening to the muffled voices above her as they calculated the $2.5 million life insurance payout and debated whether to bury the casket deeper. David's voice drifting down through the earth. The trust clears in 90 days. We'll be in Monaco before anyone asks questions. Sienna's laughter, high and cruel. Should have signed a prenup, baby. 6 minutes of Tammy's body screaming, her lungs burning, her mind writing goodbye letters to a life she'd poured everything into. A marriage she'd protected, a husband she'd trusted, a home she'd built with money her grandmother had worked 3 jobs to save. But greed makes you sloppy, and David and Sienna had made one fatal, irreversible mistake. They chose to bury Tammy Warner in a forest that wasn't nearly as abandoned as they thought, because 200 yards away, sitting in a blacked-out G-Wagon with rain hammering the bulletproof windows, Kum Song was watching through night vision binoculars. Kum Song, the ghost of Seoul, the Korean Mafia king whose intricate facial tattoos told the story of every man who'd crossed him and lost. The man who controlled every illegal dollar that moved through Manhattan, who made people disappear so completely their own mothers stopped saying their names out loud. He wasn't there for Tammy. He was there for David, the investment banker who'd gotten drunk on power and ego, who'd borrowed $340,000 from Kum Song's casino 6 weeks ago to cover his mistress's plastic surgery and his sports car lease, and who'd been dodging phone calls ever since. Kum Song had come to collect. But when he saw the black SUV pull up, saw the tarp-wrapped body being dragged across wet leaves, saw the woman inside the casket still moving, still fighting, still screaming through the duct tape across her mouth, his cold, calculated collection run turned into something else entirely. He watched David in his $3,000 suit, shoveling dirt like a man digging a garden. He watched Sienna holding the umbrella, scrolling through her phone, bored. He watched them pack their tools, dust off their hands, and drive away like they'd just finished brunch. Then Kum Song stepped out of his G-Wagon. The rain soaked through his black velvet Brioni tuxedo, the one he'd been wearing to a business dinner, before David's credit card pinged at a hardware store buying shovels. His designer shoes sank into mud. His tattooed hands, adorned with rings worth more than most people's cars, gripped a shovel. And he started digging. Tammy Warner was dying, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint, her lungs collapsing, her body shutting down system by system. Then she heard it, metal striking earth, once, twice, faster now, desperate. Someone was digging her out. The casket lid cracked open with a sound like thunder, and mud-slicked hands, tattooed, powerful, belonging to a man she'd never seen before, reached down and pulled her into the rain-soaked night. Tammy gasped, coughing up dirt and blood and betrayal, her body convulsing as oxygen flooded her starved lungs. Through the downpour and the darkness, she saw him. Kum Song, a man whose face was a canvas of intricate black tattoos that crawled up his neck and across his jaw like ancient war paint. A man in a mud-ruined tuxedo that probably cost more than her car. A man whose eyes held no warmth, no pity, no mercy, only the cold, predatory calculation of someone who saw her not as a victim, but as leverage. He didn't pull her out because he was kind. He pulled her out because David owed him money, and dead women can't pay debts. But as Tammy lay there in his arms, trembling and broken, covered in the earth that was supposed to be her final resting place, something passed between them. She looked up at this tattooed monster, kneeling in the mud, rain streaming down his face, his expression completely unreadable. And she didn't see a nightmare. She saw an opportunity, She saw the kind of power her husband had always kept from her, the kind of danger she'd been taught to fear, the kind of man who didn't negotiate or forgive or forget. Some women get buried and beg for mercy. Tammy Warner got buried and came back with a shovel. And sometimes, that's exactly what justice requires. Before we get into how Kum Song transformed Tammy from a terrified, mud-covered victim into the woman who would stand over her husband's open grave, holding the same shovel he'd used on her, take a moment to subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is reaching. Because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about resurrection, and the razor-thin line between the monster who saves you and the monster you become. The champagne tasted wrong. Tammy Warner would replay that moment 1,000 times in the darkness. The way David had smiled when he handed her the crystal flute. The way Sienna had turned away too quickly. Her personal trainer's muscled shoulders tense beneath that ridiculously expensive athleisure wear. The way the bubbles had felt sharp and chemical on her tongue, wrong in a way she couldn't articulate before the room started to tilt. It was their 5th wedding anniversary. David had insisted on celebrating at home, in the brownstone her grandmother had left her, the one with the marble countertops and the view of Central Park, the one that had made David's eyes light up the first time he saw it, long before he'd bothered to look at her the same way. "To us," he'd said, raising his glass, "to new beginnings." New beginnings. The phrase echoed in her skull as her vision blurred, as her legs gave out, as David caught her with hands that felt clinical, efficient, like he was moving furniture instead of holding his wife. "Shh," he'd whispered against her hair. "It's almost over." But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The last thing Tammy remembered before the darkness took her completely was Sienna's voice, bright and careless. "The trunk's already lined. Did you remember the tarp?" She woke up screaming into duct tape. The terror was immediate and absolute. Darkness. Complete darkness. Her hands were bound behind her back with zip ties that cut into her wrists. Her ankles were bound too, and she was moving, being carried, the world tilting and swaying beneath her. Rain. She could hear rain drumming against metal, could feel the vibration of tires on wet pavement. She was in a trunk, David's trunk, the Mercedes he'd bought with her family money, the one he'd insisted on leasing instead of buying because investments appreciate, cars depreciate, Tam. Panic clawed at her throat. She thrashed, trying to scream, but the duct tape turned everything into muffled, pathetic whimpers. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Every breath was a battle, pulled in through her nose in desperate, insufficient gasps. The car slowed, stopped. Doors opened and closed with expensive German-engineered thuds. Then voices. David's voice, closer than she'd expected, right above her head. "Help me get her in the box. She's heavier than she looks." Sienna's laugh was sharp, cruel. "That's what happens when you marry for money instead of fitness, babe. Should have kept her on the meal plan I designed." The trunk opened. Cold rain hit Tammy's face, shocking and clean. She saw them for one horrible crystalline moment. David in his designer raincoat, the one she'd bought him for Christmas. Sienna in black yoga pants and a matching jacket, her blonde ponytail perfect, even in the storm. And behind them, illuminated by the Mercedes interior lights, a pine casket. Simple, cheap, the kind you'd use for a pauper's burial. They lifted her. Tammy fought with everything she had, writhing, trying to make herself impossible to carry, but the drugs were still in her system, making her movements sluggish, uncoordinated. David grunted with effort. Sienna complained about getting mud on her new Lululemon leggings. Then they dropped her into the casket. Tammy's scream died behind the tape as she landed hard on satin lining that smelled like chemicals and death. She stared up at them, at her husband, and the woman he'd been sleeping with for God knows how long, and for one insane moment she thought they might stop, that David might see her terror and remember that he'd once claimed to love her. Instead, he checked his watch. A Patek Philippe, another gift from her. "Insurance policy pays out in 3 business days," he said. "We need to be in Monaco before the trust clears. 90 days, max." Sienna leaned over the casket, her face beautiful and pitiless. Should have signed a prenup, Tammy. Poor financial planning, really. Then David lowered the lid. The last thing Tammy saw was her husband's face, backlit by storm clouds in the Mercedes headlights, completely devoid of emotion, like he was closing a filing cabinet, like she was already gone. The lid came down. Darkness swallowed her whole, and somewhere above, she heard the sound she'd hear in every nightmare for the rest of her life, the sharp, metallic crack of a hammer driving nails through wood. The casket was moving again, being lifted, carried. Tammy felt the angle shift as they lowered it into something deep. Then came the sound that would haunt her forever. Dirt hitting wood. Not the soft patter of rain, but the heavy, deliberate dump of shovel loads of earth, burying her alive. She clawed at the lid with her bound hands, her fingernails splitting, blood slicking the satin. The air was already running out. She could feel it, the way the oxygen tasted thinner with every breath, the way her lungs had to work harder to pull in each gasp. Above her, she could hear David and Sienna talking, their voices muffled but audible through the wood and earth. Is this deep enough? It's a forest, babe. No one comes out here. 3 feet is plenty. What about animals? By the time anything digs her up, she'll be bones, untraceable. More dirt. The sound getting duller, more distant as the grave filled. Tammy's mind fractured into pure animal panic. This couldn't be happening, this couldn't be real. She was Tammy Warner, a woman with a college degree and a brownstone and a life insurance policy she'd thought was responsible planning. She wasn't supposed to die in a box in the woods, murdered by a man she'd trusted with everything. Her vision started to blur. Not that it mattered in the absolute darkness, but she could feel it, the way consciousness was slipping away at the edges. Hypoxia. That's what it was called. Oxygen deprivation. She'd learned about it in a biology class a lifetime ago. 6 minutes. The human brain could survive 6 minutes without oxygen before permanent damage. She was on minute 4. Tammy's fingernails were bloody stumps now, torn down to the quick from clawing at wood that wouldn't give. Her lungs burned. Each breath was a knife. She could taste copper, could feel her heartbeat slowing, her body shutting down to conserve whatever oxygen remained. Above her, the voices faded. Car doors slammed. An engine started. They were leaving her. Tammy's mind started to fracture. She thought about her grandmother, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to save enough money to buy that brownstone, who died 6 months ago, never knowing her granddaughter had married a monster. She thought about the life she'd imagined with David, the children they'd planned to have, the vacations they'd never take. She thought about dying alone in the dark, unmourned, her body rotting in a cheap casket while David and Sienna sipped cocktails on a Mediterranean beach. Minute 5. Her vision went gray. Her body stopped fighting. The panic drained away, replaced by something that felt almost peaceful. This was it. This was how Tammy Warner died. Then she heard it. Metal striking earth. A shovel. Someone was digging. Once. Twice. Fast and desperate and getting closer. Kum Song had been watching the Palisades forest for 3 hours when David Park's Mercedes pulled up. He sat in his G-Wagon, rain hammering the bulletproof windows, night vision binoculars trained on the access road. This wasn't his usual territory. He controlled Manhattan, not the suburbs. But David Park had made this Kum Song's business the moment he'd borrowed $340,000 from the casino and disappeared. Nobody disappeared from Kum Song, not ever. His associates called him the Ghost of Soul, not because he was hard to find. Kum Song was impossible to miss, with facial tattoos that told the story of every man who'd crossed him and lost, but because people who wronged him had a way of becoming ghosts themselves. Quietly, efficiently, permanently. He'd tracked David here through credit card purchases, 2 shovels, a tarp, a pine casket ordered online, and delivered to a storage unit in Westchester. Amateur hour. David Park was a banker, not a criminal, and it showed in every sloppy, traceable move he made. Kum Song had expected David to be burying money, maybe evidence of embezzlement, something that would give him leverage to collect his debt. He did not expect David to be burying a woman. A living woman. Still moving inside the casket, still screaming through duct tape, still fighting even as they hammered the lid shut. Kum Song lowered the binoculars. His face, illuminated by the G-Wagon's interior lights, showed no emotion. He'd seen worse in his 43 years. Much worse. He'd done worse. But there was a code, even in his world. You didn't bury civilians. You didn't make them suffer. And you definitely didn't bury a woman alive and then drive away in a luxury sedan like you'd just finished a business meeting. He watched David and the blonde woman. Kum Song's intelligence had identified her as Sienna Cross, personal trainer, David's mistress for the past 8 months, pack their tools. They were laughing. Actually laughing. The blonde was complaining about mud on her shoes. Kum Song's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. Each of his rings was worth more than the casket they'd just buried that woman in. The dragon ring on his right hand, solid platinum, emerald eyes, had been a gift from a Chinese triad leader after Kum Song had helped negotiate a particularly bloody territorial dispute. The scorpion ring on his left hand had belonged to a man who'd tried to poison him. That man was now fertilizing a construction site in Queens. The Mercedes pulled away, headlights cutting through the rain. Kum Song waited exactly 30 seconds. Then he stepped out of the G-Wagon. The rain soaked through his Brioni tuxedo immediately. He'd been wearing it to a business dinner, a euphemism for executing a contract on a rival gang leader, when David's credit card had pinged at the hardware store. The tuxedo was custom-made, velvet, worth $8,000. The mud would ruin it. Kum Song didn't care. He walked to the G-Wagon's cargo area and pulled out a shovel, German-engineered carbon fiber handle, kept there for exactly these kinds of unexpected situations. Then he walked to the fresh grave, his designer shoes sinking into mud with every step, and started digging. 3 feet wasn't deep. David and Sienna had been lazy, arrogant, convinced no one would ever find this place. Kum Song dug fast, efficiently, muscles moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd buried his share of bodies and knew exactly how much earth to move. Dirt flew. Rain washed it away almost as fast as he could excavate it. His tattoos glistened wet in the dim forest light. Intricate Korean designs that covered his neck, climbed his jaw, disappeared into his sharp fade haircut. Each one had meaning. Each one had been earned in blood. The shovel hit wood. Kum Song cleared the lid, his movements urgent now. He could see scratches on the pine, deep gouges where fingernails had clawed from the inside, blood, smeared and diluted by rain. She was still fighting, or she had been. He jammed the shovel under the lid and pried. The cheap wood splintered, nails squealing as they pulled free. The casket cracked open. Inside, barely conscious, covered in blood and dirt and terror, was a black woman in a silk dress that had once been elegant. Her wrists were bound. Her mouth was taped. Her eyes were rolling back in her head, oxygen-starved and dying. Kum Song reached in and pulled her out. Tammy's first breath of free air felt like swallowing glass. She gasped, coughed, vomited dirt and blood and bile into the mud. Someone had ripped the duct tape from her mouth. The pain barely registered against everything else, and was cutting the zip ties from her wrists and ankles with a knife that gleamed even in the darkness. Rain poured down her face. She was alive. Impossibly, incomprehensibly alive. Tammy's vision cleared slowly, her oxygen-starved brain struggling to process what she was seeing. A man, kneeling in the mud beside her. A man whose face was covered in intricate black tattoos that crawled up his neck and across his jaw like ancient war paint. A man in a mud-ruined tuxedo that probably cost more than her car. A man whose eyes held no warmth, no pity, no mercy. Who? She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her voice barely a whisper. Kum Song, he said. His voice was low, accented, completely devoid of emotion. Your husband owes me money. Tammy's brain couldn't process this. David owed this man money? This tattooed stranger who just dug her out of a grave? I don't understand. David Park, investment banker, your husband. He borrowed $340,000 from my casino 6 weeks ago. He stopped answering my calls. Kum Song stood, looking down at her with eyes that calculated and assessed like she was a business problem to be solved. I tracked him here. I expected him to be burying money or evidence. I did not expect him to be burying you. Tammy tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed back into the mud, trembling, her body in shock. He tried to kill me. David and Sienna. They drugged me. They buried me alive. For the insurance money. For my grandmother's estate. I know, Kumsong said. I watched. You watched? Rage cut through Tammy's shock. You watched them bury me alive and you just sat there? I waited for them to leave, Kumsong corrected. If I had intervened while they were here, they would have run, disappeared, changed their names, fled the country. This way, they think you're dead. They think they won. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. They are wrong. Tammy stared at him. This man, this stranger, this tattooed monster in a velvet tuxedo who'd just saved her life for reasons that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with money. What happens now? She whispered. Kumsong extended his hand. His rings caught what little light filtered through the storm. Platinum, gold, precious stones that cost more than most people earned in a year. Now you come with me. You're dead to the world, Mrs. Park. That makes you very valuable. Tammy looked at his hand. At the tattoos that covered it. At the scars that spoke of violence and survival. She looked back at the open grave, at the casket with her bloody fingerprints still visible on the inside of the lid. She could die here, in this forest, too broken to survive, or she could take the hand of the devil himself and live. Tammy reached up and took his hand. Kumsong pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness, his grip iron strong but careful not to hurt her damaged wrists. He steadied her as she swayed, then guided her toward the G-Wagon, one hand on her elbow like she was fragile porcelain instead of a mud-covered woman who'd just clawed her way back from death. The interior of the G-Wagon was warmth and leather and the faint scent of expensive cologne. Kumsong wrapped her in a blanket that appeared from somewhere in the back seat, then started the engine. Heat flooded the vehicle. Where are you taking me? Tammy's voice was barely audible over the rain. Somewhere safe, Kumsong said, pulling onto the access road. Somewhere David and Sienna will never find you. Somewhere you can decide what happens next. What if I want to go to the police? Kumsong's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Then you'll die anyway. David will lawyer up, claim you're mentally unstable, say this is a domestic dispute. By the time the system processes your complaint, he'll be in Monaco with your money, and you'll be in witness protection, if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, he'll finish what he started. He paused. The police are not equipped for this kind of justice, Mrs. Park. And you are? I am equipped for many things. He accelerated onto the highway, the G-Wagon's engine purring like a satisfied predator. Justice, vengeance, collections. Your husband owes me $340,000. You can help me collect. Or you can disappear, start over somewhere far away, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder wondering if David will find you. Tammy leaned back against the leather seat, her body shaking with delayed shock. Rain streaked the windows. The forest disappeared behind them. Ahead, the lights of Manhattan glowed against the storm clouds like a distant, dangerous promise. What's the third option? She heard herself ask. Kumsong's reflection smiled in the rearview mirror. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a shark recognizing another predator. The third option is the one I recommend. You stay dead. David and Sienna think they won. And when they least expect it, when they're comfortable and careless and counting your money, he paused. We bury them instead. Tammy woke up in a place that shouldn't exist. The last thing she remembered was the G-Wagon, the rain, Kumsong's voice offering her options that all tasted like different flavors of death or vengeance. She must have passed out, shock, exhaustion, the after effects of whatever David had drugged her with. Now she was in a bed. An actual bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and a duvet that probably cost more than her wedding dress. The room around her was sleek, modern, aggressively minimalist in the way that screamed obscene wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a view of Manhattan that she recognized. Tribeca. Somewhere high, probably one of those buildings that didn't advertise and cost $20 million for a studio apartment. Tammy sat up slowly. Her body ached everywhere. Her wrists were bandaged. Professional medical wrapping, not amateur first aid. Someone had cleaned her, changed her into silk pajamas, treated her injuries while she slept. The bedroom door opened. A woman entered, Korean, mid-40s, wearing scrubs and carrying a medical bag. She had the efficient, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen worse than a mud-covered woman dug out of a grave. "You're awake," the woman said. Her English was perfect, accent slight. "Good. I'm Dr. Yoon. I've been monitoring you for the past 6 hours. Vitals are stable. No permanent damage from the oxygen deprivation, though you'll have nightmares for a while. The wrist wounds will heal clean if you keep them wrapped." "Where am I?" Tammy's voice was hoarse. "Kumsong's safe house, one of several. This particular one doesn't legally exist. The building records show this floor as mechanical space. You're dead to the world here, Mrs. Park. Completely off the grid." Dr. Yoon set down her medical bag and checked Tammy's pulse with professional detachment. "How do you feel?" "Like I was buried alive," Tammy said flatly. "Accurate." Dr. Yoon made notes on a tablet. "You're lucky. Another 2 minutes and the brain damage would have been permanent. Another 5 and you'd be dead." She looked up, her expression softening slightly. "Kumsong got to you just in time." "Why does he have a doctor on staff who treats people dug out of graves?" Dr. Yoon smiled thinly. "I treat many things for Kumsong. Most of them involve violence. Some of them involve saving lives. You're one of the latter." She stood. "He wants to see you when you're ready. Take your time. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt absurd. Tammy had been safe in her brownstone, safe in her marriage, safe in her life. And all of it had been a lie. She got out of bed slowly, testing her balance. The room had a walk-in closet. Inside, she found clothes in her size. Designer labels, perfectly tailored. Nothing she would have chosen for herself, but everything that fit. Someone had measured her while she slept. Someone had prepared for her to wake up. Tammy dressed in black jeans and a cashmere sweater, both so expensive they felt like wearing air. Then she walked out of the bedroom into the main living space of the safe house. It was exactly what she'd expected from a Korean Mafia king. Brutally modern, aggressively luxurious, and designed to make visitors feel small. The living room was all glass and steel and custom furniture that probably had wait lists measured in years. One wall was dominated by monitors showing security feeds from what looked like every corner of Manhattan. Another wall was weaponry, guns, knives, things Tammy didn't have names for, all displayed with museum-quality lighting. Kumsong stood at the windows, looking out at the city. He'd changed from the ruined tuxedo into black dress pants and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, showing more of the intricate tattoos that covered his arms. In the daylight filtering through the glass, Tammy could see them more clearly. Dragons and tigers and Korean characters that probably spelled death or vengeance or something equally unsubtle. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Park, you're awake." "Stop calling me that," Tammy said. Her voice was stronger now, anger cutting through the shock. "I'm not Mrs. Park, not anymore. He buried me. That marriage is dead." "Legally, you're still married. Legally, you're also dead, or you will be in approximately—" He checked an expensive watch. 18 hours when David files the missing person report. Kumsong gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need to discuss your options." Tammy didn't sit. She walked to the windows, standing next to him, looking out at the city she'd thought she knew. "You said there were 3 options. Run, go to the police, or bury them." She turned to face him. "Tell me about option 3. Kumsong's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. Option 3 requires patience, planning, and a willingness to become something you weren't before. "I was a woman who trusted her husband," Tammy said bitterly. "I was a woman who thought love and money and a brownstone in Manhattan meant I'd won at life. That woman is already dead. David and Sienna killed her when they closed that casket lid." "Then who are you now?" Tammy looked down at her bandaged wrists, at the evidence of her desperate fight for survival. She thought about David's face as he lowered the casket lid. Sienna's laughter about prenups. The insurance policy they'd planned to cash in on her corpse. "I'm the woman who's going to bury them back," she said softly. Kumsong smiled. It was the same shark smile from the car, the one that promised violence and delivered it with interest. Good. Then let's discuss the specifics. Kumsong pulled up a holographic display on one of the monitors. Financial records, transaction histories, surveillance footage, everything David had done in the past 6 weeks, laid out in damning detail. Your husband is a gambler, Kumsong said, his tone clinical. Not the recreational kind, the addicted kind, the kind who loses $340,000 in a single weekend and thinks he can borrow from people like me without consequences. He tapped the screen, bringing up casino footage. David at a high-stakes poker table, sweating, desperate, making increasingly reckless bets. He burned through his own money first, then he started using yours. Tammy stared at the footage. She'd never known. David had hidden it perfectly. The late nights he'd claimed were work meetings, the stress he'd blamed on deadlines, the distance she'd attributed to the natural cooling of a 5-year marriage. When did he decide to kill me? 3 months ago, when your grandmother died and left you the estate. Kumsong brought up another screen, emails between David and Sienna. Their messages encrypted, but not encrypted enough. He'd already been planning to divorce you and take half in the settlement. Then the inheritance arrived and he realized he could take everything. The life insurance policy was his idea. Sienna suggested making it look like a disappearance rather than a murder. Less investigation. Tammy's hands clenched into fists. How long have they been together? 8 months, since he hired her as your trainer. Kumsong's voice held no sympathy, just facts delivered like bullets. It was calculated from the beginning. She seduced him. He was easy. Gambling addiction, mounting debt, a wife with family money. They planned this together. And you knew all of this. I know everything about everyone who owes me money. He turned to face her fully. David borrowed from me to pay off other debts. When he realized he couldn't repay me, he decided to kill you and use your money to solve his problems. Your death was always about the money, Tammy. The insurance payout, the estate, the trust your grandmother set up. He paused. The trust that, as it happens, I now control. Tammy's blood went cold. What? Your grandmother was a smart woman. She didn't trust David. The estate was placed in an irrevocable trust with very specific conditions. You could access it for living expenses, but the bulk of it couldn't be touched until your 40th birthday, unless you died, in which case it would go to your spouse. Kumsong smiled that shark smile. What your grandmother didn't know was that the law firm managing the trust was one of mine, a front for money laundering. When she died, I acquired the trust. Legally, I'm now the trustee. So David was going to kill me for money you already controlled. Ironic, isn't it? But also useful. Because now, Tammy Warner, you and I are bound together. You need my resources to get your revenge. I need you alive to maintain control of the trust and collect what David owes me. He extended his hand. This is a blood debt now. We work together, or we both lose. Tammy stared at his tattooed hand. Every ring told a story of violence. Every scar spoke of survival. She was making a deal with a monster. But monsters, she was learning, were sometimes exactly what justice required. She shook his hand. His grip was iron, binding. What do I need to learn? She asked. Everything, Kumsong said. How to shoot, how to lead, how to hide your emotions behind a mask so perfect even your enemies believe it. How to be patient when your rage demands blood. How to strike when the moment is perfect. He turned back to the monitors, pulling up a calendar. David will file the missing person report tomorrow. The police investigation will last approximately 2 weeks before they classify you as presumed dead. The insurance company will begin processing the claim. In exactly 47 days, there will be a memorial gala. David's idea, hosted at the Plaza Hotel. High society, networking. He'll collect the insurance check that night, surrounded by people who'll congratulate him on his strength during this difficult time. 47 days, Tammy repeated. 47 days to transform from a victim into something else entirely. Kumsong's eyes met hers. Can you do it? Tammy thought about the casket, the darkness, the sound of dirt hitting wood, David's face as he closed the lid. I can do worse than that, she said. The transformation began the next morning. Kum Song's safe house had a basement. Not the kind of basement normal buildings had, concrete and storage and maybe a wine cellar. This was something else entirely. A shooting range, a training gym, a war room designed to turn civilians into weapons. "Strip the weapon," Kum Song ordered. Tammy stared at the Glock 19 on the table in front of her. She'd never held a gun before, let alone taken one apart. Her hands shook as she tried to remember the sequence he'd shown her. Magazine release, slide lock, barrel removal. "Faster," Kum Song said. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. When you need to clear a jam in the field, you won't have time to think. Your hands need to remember. Her fingers fumbled. The magazine clattered to the floor. Tammy wanted to scream, to cry, to give up. She'd been buried alive 3 days ago. She was still having nightmares about suffocating in the dark. And now, this man wanted her to become someone who could kill without hesitation. "Again," Kum Song said. She did it again, and again, and again. 20 times. 50 times. Until her hands stopped shaking and the movements became automatic. Until she could strip and reassemble the weapon in darkness, in rain, while exhausted and terrified. Then came the shooting. "Stance," Kum Song corrected, adjusting her shoulders with hands that were surprisingly gentle. "Grip. Sight alignment. Breath control. You're not trying to hit the target. You're trying to put the bullet exactly where you want it." The first time she fired, the recoil shocked her. The noise was deafening even through the ear protection. The bullet went wide, missing the target completely. "Again," Kum Song said. By the end of the first week, Tammy could hit center mass at 25 yards. By the end of the second week, she could do it while moving, while stressed, while someone was screaming in her ear. Kum Song didn't believe in gentle training. He believed in pressure, in pushing past the point where most people would break, in finding out what someone was truly capable of when survival demanded it. But the physical training was the easy part. "Emotion is weakness," Kum Song said one evening. They were in the safe house's main room, surveillance footage of David playing on the monitors. He was at a restaurant, laughing with Sienna, spending money that should have been Tammy's. Right now, watching him, you feel rage. I can see it in your eyes, in the way your jaw clenches, in how your hands curl into fists. "He's celebrating my death," Tammy said through gritted teeth. "He's living my life with her." Yes, and if you walked up to him right now, he'd see that rage. He'd know you were coming. He'd run, hide, call the police, disappear. Kum Song turned to face her. "You need to learn to hide what you feel, to smile while planning murder, to be warm while your heart is ice, to make your enemies comfortable until the moment you destroy them." He taught her to lie with her face, to control her microexpressions, to modulate her voice, to project whatever emotion would serve her purpose while keeping her true feelings locked behind walls of steel. He made her practice until she could watch footage of David and Sienna and show nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not the burning desire for vengeance that consumed her every waking moment. "Why do you know how to do this?" Tammy asked one night. They were 3 weeks into her training. She could shoot, fight, lie. She was becoming something new, something dangerous. Kum Song poured himself whiskey, single malt, probably older than Tammy. "Because I was like you once. Not buried alive, but destroyed nonetheless. Someone took everything from me, my family, my future, my choice of who to become." He stared into his glass. "I learned to survive by becoming something they feared more than I feared them. That's what you're doing now." "Do you regret it? Becoming this?" "Every day." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "But regret doesn't change what's necessary. You asked me why I saved you. The truth? Because when I saw them burying you, I saw myself in that casket, and I wanted to give you what no one gave me, a choice about what happens next." Tammy raised her own glass, water since Kum Song wouldn't let her drink during training. "Then I choose to bury them back." "Good," Kum Song said, "because the memorial gala is in 3 weeks, and we have work to do." The Plaza Hotel glittered like a jewel box. David had spared no expense for his wife's memorial gala. The ballroom was filled with Manhattan's elite, investment bankers, socialites, people who'd never actually met Tammy but showed up because the invitation had promised premium networking and an open bar, crystal chandeliers, live orchestra, waiters circulating with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent. David stood at the center of it all, looking appropriately grief-stricken in a custom Tom Ford suit. Sienna was conspicuously absent, too soon to appear publicly as his new girlfriend, though Kum Song's intelligence indicated they were already living together in Tammy's brownstone. "He's good," Tammy said. She watched through binoculars from a van parked 3 blocks away, Kum Song beside her monitoring multiple screens. "Look at him, shaking hands, accepting condolences. He actually looks sad." "He's a sociopath," Kum Song said. "They're excellent actors, but watch his eyes when he thinks no one's looking." Tammy watched. David stepped away from a conversation, checked his phone, and for just a moment, his expression changed. The grief vanished, replaced by calculation, excitement. He was texting Sienna, probably planning their flight to Monaco, counting down the minutes until the insurance check cleared. "The insurance company representative is here," one of Kum Song's men reported through the comms. "They're about to present the check." Kum Song looked at Tammy. "Are you ready?" She thought about the woman she'd been 47 days ago, a woman who'd trusted her husband, a woman who'd thought she was safe, a woman who'd died in a casket in the woods. Then she thought about the woman she was now, the one who could shoot center mass at 50 yards, the one who'd learned to hide murder behind a smile, the one who'd spent 47 days preparing for this exact moment. "I'm ready," Tammy said. She stepped out of the van. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a dress the exact color of the dirt they'd buried her in, earth-brown silk that clung to her body, designer heels that made her legs look lethal, jewelry that caught the light like accusations. Her hair was styled perfectly. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like a ghost wearing high fashion. Kum Song's men were already in position. They'd infiltrated the hotel staff, the security team, the valet service. When Tammy walked into that ballroom, every exit would be controlled. Every camera would be recording. And when the moment came, no one would be able to stop what happened next. Tammy entered the plaza through a service entrance, moving through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who belonged. Kum Song had taught her that too, how to walk like she owned every room she entered, how to make people's eyes slide past her until the moment she wanted to be seen. She positioned herself in the shadows near the ballroom entrance. On stage, the insurance representative was approaching the microphone. David stood beside him, looking solemn, his hand over his heart like a man in genuine mourning. "Ladies and gentlemen," the representative began, "on behalf of Metropolitan Life Insurance, we'd like to present Mr. David Park with—" The lights cut out, complete darkness. The ballroom erupted in confused murmurs, the clink of champagne glasses, nervous laughter. Someone called for the lights. Someone else joked about the plaza's electrical system. Then a single spotlight illuminated the ballroom entrance. Tammy stepped into the light. The silence was immediate and absolute. 300 people stared at a woman who was supposed to be dead, who was supposed to be mourned, who was standing in a dirt-colored dress looking like death itself had sent her back for unfinished business. David's face went white, then gray, then the color of someone witnessing their own execution. Tammy walked forward, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. The crowd parted. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stared at the impossible woman in the impossible dress walking toward the man who'd tried to bury her. "Hello, David," Tammy said. Her voice carried across the silent ballroom, amplified by the sound system Kum Song's men had rigged. "Did you miss me?" David tried to speak. Nothing came out. He looked like a man seeing a ghost, which, Tammy supposed, he was. He finally managed. "Tammy, you're alive?" Disappointed? Tammy smiled. It was the smile Kum Song had taught her, the one that looked warm but promised violence. "I know you worked so hard to make sure I wasn't. The champagne, the casket, the forest, you really thought of everything." The crowd gasped. Phones came out, recording everything. This was going to be all over social media in minutes. The attempted murder of a Manhattan socialite exposed at her own memorial gala. David's career was over. His freedom was over. His life as he knew it was over. But Tammy wasn't done. You made one mistake, David. One fatal, unforgivable mistake. She stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear her next words. You buried me in the wrong forest. You chose a site that was being watched, by someone who owed you money, someone who doesn't forgive debts. David's eyes widened, understanding, horror, the realization of exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Come Song sends his regards, Tammy whispered. Before David could run, before he could scream, Come Song's men moved in. They weren't gentle. They grabbed him like he was cargo, not a person, dragging him toward the service entrance while the crowd watched in shocked silence. Tammy turned to address the ballroom. I'm sorry to interrupt my own memorial, but as you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. She smiled at the insurance representative, who looked like he might faint. I believe that check was made out to my husband. You'll want to put a stop payment on that. He won't be needing it where he's going. Then she walked out of the Plaza Hotel the same way she'd walked in, like she owned every inch of ground beneath her feet. The Palisades forest looked different at night. Tammy stood at the edge of the grave, her grave, the one David and Sienna had dug for her 47 days ago. Come Song's men had brought them both here, bound and gagged, forced to kneel beside two freshly dug holes that were exactly 3 feet deep. The same depth David had used for her. Sienna was crying, mascara running down her perfect cheekbones, her expensive athleisure stained with mud. David was beyond crying. He was in shock, staring at Tammy like she was a nightmare given flesh. Come Song leaned against his G-Wagon, arms crossed, watching with the detached interest of someone witnessing a problem being solved. His men surrounded the area, making sure no one would interrupt. Tammy picked up a shovel, the same shovel David had used. Come Song had saved it, kept it as evidence, as a reminder. Now it felt perfectly weighted in her hands. All those weeks of training, learning to be strong, learning to be cold. She walked to David, crouched down so they were eye level. Do you know what it feels like to suffocate? To claw at wood until your fingernails break? To know you're dying and no one's coming to save you? David tried to speak through the gag. Tammy pulled it down. Please, he gasped. Tammy, please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I was desperate. The gambling, the debt. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we can fix this. We can go to the police together. I'll confess. I'll take responsibility. Like you took responsibility when you drugged my champagne? When you hammered the casket lid shut? When you buried me alive and drove away laughing? Tammy's voice was ice. You had 47 days, David. 47 days to feel guilty, to come clean, to do the right thing. Instead, you threw a party. You celebrated my death. You planned your escape to Monaco with my money. She stood, looked at Sienna. And you helped him. You held the umbrella while he buried his wife. You laughed about prenups while I suffocated. Sienna was shaking her head frantically, trying to speak through her gag. Tammy didn't bother removing it. Here's what's going to happen, Tammy said, addressing them both. You're going to get in those caskets. You're going to feel what I felt. And then, she paused, maybe I'll let you out. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll leave you here to think about your choices while you run out of air. David's face crumpled. You can't. You're not a killer, Tammy. You're not like us. You're right, Tammy said. I'm not like you. I'm worse, because you made me this way. She looked at Come Song. Do it. His men moved with practiced efficiency. David and Sienna were lifted, struggling, screaming, begging. They were placed in the caskets, cheap pine, the same kind David had bought for Tammy. The lids came down. Nails were hammered through wood. The caskets were lowered into the graves. Tammy stood at the edge, shovel in hand, listening to them scream. She thought about mercy, about justice, about the line between them. Then she thought about the sound of dirt hitting her casket lid 47 days ago. She tossed the first shovel load of earth. The screaming intensified. David was yelling her name, begging, promising anything. Sienna's screams were pure animal terror. Tammy kept shoveling, methodical, efficient. Each load of dirt was heavier than the last, but her muscles, trained by 47 days of preparation, didn't falter. When the graves were half full, Kumsong stepped forward. Tammy? She paused, breathing hard, covered in sweat and dirt. This is the moment, he said quietly. The moment where you decide who you are. You can finish this, bury them completely, become what they tried to make you. Or you can stop here, let them feel the terror you felt, and let the law handle the rest. Either way, they're finished. Their lives are over. You've already won. Tammy looked at the half-buried caskets, at the fresh mounds of earth, at the shovel in her hands. She thought about the woman she'd been, the woman who'd trusted too much, loved too freely, believed the world was fundamentally good. That woman was dead. David and Sienna had killed her when they closed that casket lid. But the woman she'd become, the one standing here covered in dirt, holding a shovel, listening to her would-be murderers scream, that woman had a choice. Tammy dropped the shovel. Dig them out! Kumsong's men moved immediately, excavating the caskets, prying open the lids. David and Sienna emerged, gasping, sobbing, broken. They'd spent maybe 5 minutes buried, nothing compared to what Tammy had endured, but it had been enough. The police are already on their way, Kumsong said. Anonymous tip about the attempted murder of Tammy Warner. They'll find these two here, at the scene of the crime, with all the evidence they need to prosecute. Tammy looked at David one last time. He was on his knees, covered in dirt, destroyed. You wanted my death to make you rich, she said. Instead, it made you into exactly what you deserve to be, buried alive in a prison of your own making. She turned and walked to the G-Wagon, without looking back. 3 months later, Tammy stood in the office of the law firm that managed her grandmother's trust. Kumsong stood beside her, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than the entire building. The trust reverts to your control immediately, the lawyer said, sliding papers across his desk. Your husband's conviction for attempted murder invalidates his claim. The estate, the insurance policy that was never paid out, the brownstone, it's all yours again. And the debt? Tammy asked, looking at Kumsong. David's assets were seized by the court, the lawyer continued. Mr. Kumsong's casino received full restitution as part of the settlement. So that was it. The debt was paid. The bad guys were in prison. David facing 25 years, Sienna facing 15. Tammy was alive, free, and financially secure. Justice had been served. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt empty. That night, Tammy returned to Kumsong's safe house. She'd been staying there throughout the legal proceedings, claiming her brownstone held too many memories. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. She didn't know how to go back to being the woman she'd been before the burial. Kumsong was at the windows, looking out at Manhattan like he always did. It's finished, he said without turning around. You're free to return to your life. What life? Tammy asked. The woman who had that life is dead. David killed her, and She paused. I don't know who I am now. Kumsong finally turned to look at her. You're someone who survived, someone who learned to fight, someone who chose mercy when vengeance would have been easier. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. You're also someone who knows how to use the skills I taught you. The shooting, the strategy, the ability to read people, to plan, to execute. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the trust isn't the only thing you inherited, Kumsong said. Your grandmother's law firm, the one I used for money laundering, has other clients. Legitimate ones, powerful ones, people who need problems solved discreetly, protection, investigation. Sometimes justice when the law fails them. He sipped his whiskey. I'm building something new, something that operates in the gray spaces where the police can't go and criminals fear to tread. I could use a partner, someone with your particular combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and moral clarity. Tammy stared at him. You want me to work for you? With me, Kumsong corrected. As an equal. The trust gives you resources. I have infrastructure. Together, we could build an empire that does more than just survive. We could actually help people who've been betrayed the way you were. People who need someone to dig them out of their graves. Tammy thought about the last 3 months, the training, the planning. The moment she'd walked into that gala looking like death itself, the power she'd felt, the control, the way she'd been able to look David in the eye and watch him realize he'd lost everything. She thought about going back to her old life, pretending to be normal, spending her days managing her grandmother's estate and her nights having nightmares about suffocating in the dark. Or she could take what David and Sienna had tried to take from her future, her choice, her life, and turn it into something they could never have imagined. Something powerful, something dangerous, something that would ensure no one ever buried her again. Tammy raised her glass. Equal partners. I want that in writing. Kum Song smiled that shark smile. Already drafted. You'll find the contracts on your desk in the morning. They clinked glasses, standing at the window overlooking Manhattan. The city glittered below them, full of people making plans, burying secrets, thinking they were safe. They had no idea what was coming. To new beginnings, Kum Song said. To resurrection, Tammy corrected. Because that's what this was. Not just survival, but transformation. Tammy Warner had been buried alive by greed and betrayal. But the woman standing in this safe house, looking out at the city she now understood in ways she never had before, wasn't Tammy Warner anymore. She was something new. Something forged in darkness and dirt, and the desperate fight for oxygen. Something that understood both mercy and vengeance, justice and pragmatism, the law and the spaces where the law failed. She was the woman who'd clawed her way out of a grave and turned her funeral into a coronation. And Manhattan was about to learn what happened when you tried to bury someone who refused to stay dead. 6 months later, a new power structure had emerged in Manhattan's underground. The Warner-cum Empire, they called it in whispers. A partnership between a Korean Mafia king and a woman who'd literally risen from the dead. They operated in the shadows, solving problems the police couldn't touch, protecting people the law had failed, dispensing justice that was sometimes cold and always final. David Park rotted in a maximum security prison, sharing a cell with men who'd heard what he'd done and didn't take kindly to wife killers. Sienna Cross was in a women's facility upstate, her perfect body deteriorating without access to personal trainers and organic meal plans. And Tammy Warner stood in her grandmother's brownstone, now renovated, stripped of every memory of David, transformed into something that honored the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to build a legacy, looking at the wall of framed documents, her law degree, her grandmother's trust papers, the partnership agreement with Kum Song, and one more frame, smaller than the rest but positioned dead center. A photograph of a pine casket, half excavated, lid pried open. The casket that should have been her tomb, but had instead become her chrysalis. Below the photograph, a single line of text. They buried me alive. I dug myself out, and I came back with a shovel. Some women get saved by princes. Some women get saved by monsters. And some women save themselves and become something far more dangerous than either. Tammy Warner had been all 3, and that's exactly what made her unstoppable.